here right now. If you have a question and it hasn't been passed up to Michael, please pass it up and it will get up here. I'm going to take about 30 seconds and try to organize these, and then I'll ask questions for the panel. Pardon? Okay, great idea. Okay. First question, I think, is pertinent in the audience's mind regarding what we've been talking about the past 2 days and in this session in particular. The design guidelines for the future must be finished. What do you recommend is the next or first step to achieving that? Who'd like to take that? Stefan.
I could start. I'll take a stab at that. I think that what really resonated with me is that the decision-making process that was set up for the reuse area was that the local jurisdictions would initiate, and then the FORA board needs to sort of ratify the decisions of the local jurisdictions. And that just made me start to think about what tools the local jurisdictions were really using to implement this plan. So the idea, I think design guidelines, we're big advocates of form-based code, but we don't feel that they are necessary in every situation. And that communities need to be able to sort of dial up and down the form controls that they need. My colleague Tony Perez uses the metaphor of the sound master in a recording studio, that you record a great song and someone sits there with the dials and equalizes to make the sound that you are going to hear on the record. And if you want the backup singers to be a little bit louder, you turn up those dials a little bit more. So I think that it's important for the communities to have a conversation about, with regards to form, what are the things they think are really important to regulate, and what are the things that they can all agree upon would be a common platform for this approach to regulating form here. What is interesting to me is that we are trending towards, with form-based codes, these tools being regulatory. And so this, again, I think is sort of an upgrade in the operating system, where before we thought of zoning as something that was pretty simple and pretty straightforward, and we used design guidelines to get all of the other stuff out of zoning that we knew it couldn't deliver. But today we're actually able to think about those two things as integrated, where we can understand that zoning can actually be a tool that can prescriptively describe what places should be like. So I think that there is a big question there about, if the communities are ready to move in that direction, like many communities nationwide and worldwide are, that a form-based code sort of might be a very interesting process to pursue. I finally just wanted to say one thing, which was that we've been very privileged to work in these multi-jurisdictional environments, but they have never been sort of ride at Disneyland. It's never been a clean process. The idea of different jurisdictions adopting the same body of standards, there's always been compromise. There's always been issues with local needs or concerns overriding the common good, just as you would in any regional planning process. But what's been remarkable is that they've been able to retain enough to make this mutually beneficial effort worthwhile.
And I want to stay with you, Stefan, because I think there's a continuous thread we can work right through. What would it take to integrate form-based codes into existing base use plan or local zoning?
Well, I think the first step that we often advocate for is for the communities to assess the local tools that they have to understand how effective they are in delivering or not delivering the kinds of places that you have. And I think what was striking to me is that since you have these different political boundaries that aren't necessarily reflected cleanly in the plan, there are probably situations where you need to figure out a way to create a common environment that may have a different jurisdiction on either side of the street, which lends, I think, sort of this idea of the jurisdictions adopting some common standards. But I think that the first step would be to sort of, is that assessment step to understand what really would be important. The second step would be to, I think, work with the jurisdictions to agree upon an approach to how their existing zoning standards might be upgraded or moved forward for the application on these Fort Ord lands. That typically is something that is done at a very high level and is done in a very sort of interactive and iterative way with community leaders, because the decision to change zoning is not something that we would ever advocate should be taken lightly. It's something that you may do now. Maybe the last time, for example, Los Angeles is updating their zoning right now. They're updating a structure that they really hasn't been looked at since 1942. This isn't something that we can expect we can do now, and if we sort of mess it up, we can come back in a couple of years. It's a big effort for anyone to sort of undertake. So you want to make sure that, I think, the decisions that you're making are palatable and actually have a lot of community support behind them before you move forward.
Can I chime in on that?
Yes.
Just to say that we saw the $70 million picture earlier, and you guys might want to consider. It won't be $70 million. Well, okay, $70 million. Consider both some positive and negative visualizations. I've seen, actually, I give a whole talk on how to lie with visualization, and I wouldn't advocate that. Actually, Victoria could probably give a better lecture than I on that. But to show, here's some potential futures. Here's A, B, C. Just here's what could happen based on our current zoning, our current regulations. What do you think? That typically gets a whole lot of people to the table and may generate $70 million of investment, which would certainly be worthwhile.
Following on that, Doug, I want to ask you a question. In the different visual tools that you just described, are there some that you would recommend that we look at as we start this process? And actually, the writer asks, how much are they going to cost? I think that's a good question.
Okay, good. I recommend Community Viz. It's free. No, wait. Okay, let me try that again. Well, I mean, seriously, I do recommend Community Viz. I think it's a very versatile tool. Also, some of these sketch tools, I don't know, some of you architects will tell us what you use. SketchUp is still very popular. It's completely free. You can do some pretty cool things in it. Community Viz is not expensive. The municipal price is less than $1,000. Probably you want to get, though, some expertise in on any of these. You want to get Stefan to help you. You want to get some of these guys around the room to help you with just sort of what is the right way to use visualization and use these tools. And that, once you get into consultants, okay, it's $10,000 or $20,000 or something. But $200,000. Do I hear $250,000? Okay. So it's a huge range depending on sort of what you can afford and how much time you have and mostly what results you need. But I guess, in City Engine, I tell you it looks fantastic, and we're hoping to work with very soon. But the one thing I would not recommend is don't let somebody come in and say, I'm going to charge you $100,000 for a modern visualization. People used to do that 10 years ago. And there were these gorgeous, gorgeous visualizations, and they showed them once in a movie theater, and then, poof. So do not do that. Don't pay a whole lot of money to just get some of these visuals out there, get the conversation started. Then if you need to add more, explore, or try a bunch of different plans, great. But my suggestion would be start small with them.
All right, thank you. Bill, we have a couple for you now. The first one is, out of the 5 types of people, participants in the charrette process, can you elaborate on how to encourage the affected parties to participate?
Okay, that's the biggest question in terms of community participation. How do you get the non-meeting goers there? Because there's a group that's always going to be there. They're at every meeting. You don't even have to announce that they show up. And God help you if they're the only people in the room. You really want to have a broad participation. So we have some tools in our toolkit where the people running the project who are bringing the community together go through a series of analysis in terms of, well, how do you get them in the room? Okay, you have to understand what constitutes a win for them to be there. You really have to understand that people are busy. They don't have the resources to come. They're too distracted by, they have their priorities. So how do you make it, how do you become their number one priority of the day? You have to understand what constitutes a win for them to be there. And then start to communicate that win. And I hate to say it, but community participation takes a lot of resources. You just can't do it through the internet. Especially the underserved, especially those populations who are hard to get there. It really takes first knowing who they are, and they're not the usual suspects. Sometimes people in the community are not the appointed people, they're not the elected people. They're people who sit on their doorstep and talk to their neighbors all day long, and they're the real power source in the community. You have to know who they are, so you need local, on-the-ground people who understand who they are, know how to communicate, why should Mrs. Jones participate in this? And then you need to figure out how to communicate with them. And it may mean going to the front porch. So no simple answer to the solution, but it means having the intent from the top to commit the resources to good public involvement. That is the biggest hurdle there is, because there's no shortcutting it. It takes resources. Now you can use students. A friend of mine uses his sociology class that's happy to go out there and walk the streets and talk to people. You can use, free labor like that, but it takes work to really get a community involved.
All right, thank you. This next one touches on something that I was thinking of as I was listening to all of you speak, and it goes back to yesterday where we first heard about discussion of a business model to create the economic development here. One of the comments that was made was Bill's daughter or children could not stay here. They were going to move away because it wasn't here. And then today, in your discussion, Bill, in the earlier session on streets, maybe both, had to do with creation of spaces that our kids would want to move back to. And I thought, okay, we have the economic model, we have the kids, and the question is, how do we create the system where if the structures are built, they will come? And maybe it's more of a comment than a question, but
okay, so the question is, if you build...
Where are these people? If the structures are built, will they come?
Well, I think you're talking about the...
How do you identify the populace for which we're designing?
How do you identify the populace for which you're designing? Well, there's several tools in the toolkit, and I'm not an economist on this. It's probably a question for Chuck. But there are people who do target market analysis, for instance, which is an unconventional way to predict markets that don't exist in your area. And they use target market analysis, zip codes, and buying preferences, and so forth, where they can actually predict the market for a product that does not exist. Like the conventional development community and finance community looks for comparables, right? There are no comps for live-work units, so therefore you can't build them. So a target market analysis can predict the market for an untested product type. So that's one way I know how to do it.
My favorite saying on this is one of the best economic development policies there is to build a wonderful place. You'll attract people if it's wonderful. They'll come for the lifestyle. They'll stay for friends. They'll stay for jobs. They'll make jobs there if there aren't any. So if you start from place, a lot of the rest ideally will follow.
Okay. This goes back to something that was touched on and perhaps answered, but since the person watching this being streamed live emailed this in, I'm going to ask it. How do you handle parking structures, design garages around these developed areas and these streets? Parking is a key element. We can't argue with that.
I can take a stab at that. What initially comes to mind, I think it was in Victor's presentation, or maybe it was Chuck, the picture of Country Club Plaza in Kansas City, built in the 1920s. Multiple parking structures that are almost totally invisible from the street. It was the first commercial development to be built in this country that integrated structured parking as a commercial strategy, and they did a remarkable thing in that they designed it, and this was seen as a new idea in the 1920s, but in many ways we're still trying to figure out how to do this in new developments. I think from a form standpoint, there are really effective things you can do to both regulate areas that can handle reduced parking. Places that are pedestrian-oriented in nature can be built in a way that suburban parking requirements may not be necessary. That wouldn't be possible probably anywhere at Fort Ord, but there might be certain places where that can be targeted, and that can result in a higher efficiency of land development where you don't have to devote so much land to parking. But there's always going to be a need for parking in a place like this, particularly in a campus environment where you have a lot of commuters. There's standards that you can provide to make sure that that parking is located in certain places, either behind buildings or you limit how much parking can actually be oriented along street faces or along public spaces, so that it visually it doesn't start to become a detriment to creating a high-quality pedestrian environment.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question, and then it's time for lunch. How do we encourage common community design over multiple jurisdictions?
I'll take a quick one at that. By the way, I just wanted to add on to my last comment that there's one thing to get the people to come to the meeting, but with a lot of these people, you get one chance with them. And you better make it a really great meeting. Make it fun, make it interactive, let their input have an impact, and have them come back. So multi-jurisdictional equation is that we're working in Michigan on a 21-mile stretch of corridor that has many jurisdictions, some of which don't get along together. I don't know what it's like here. I'm coming right in from Portland, but they don't get along together over there with some of these jurisdictions. We're creating a charrette process where they are creating a joint vision for this corridor, which changes over places, but the main thing is to get a joint vision for how they want to grow. And one thing they do agree upon there in Michigan is they want to grow walkable communities. So we've got that highest level design principle in place. And then we work down from, okay, well, what are you talking about like that? And we use design to help explain it through high-tech and low-tech methods. We call it the high-touch, low-touch, high-touch, high-tech method. And you draw things with hand, and you show them on the computer, and you say, now, is this placemaking for you? Is this placemaking for you? Is this walkability? And you get to the point where you draw images. The drawings are huge. They may not agree on things on paper, may not agree on things on flip charts, but if you show them a picture of that street of Michigan Avenue, everybody's going, 80% of the people in the room from all the jurisdictions are saying, that's the picture. And then you have to get to codes and get so forth to build the picture. So longer answer than that, but I think working visually with people through design and getting people to collaborate and understand that highest level of how do you want to grow? And then we'll get to the details once we establish that high level.
Okay, before I thank everyone,
Sorry, guys.
That's fine.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, no problem. I was just going to add really briefly that our experience in Beaufort County was that there was enough amongst the jurisdictions for them to realize that there was a mutual benefit to doing this. I think this is a situation where you want a rising tide to lift all boats. There's a wonderful institutional center here. Just from a fundamental standpoint, if everyone is not physically well connected to that institution, they won't be able to sort of all mutually benefit from its presence. And I think that might be a starting point to sort of think about where communities here might find common ground in moving forward.
Okay, before I thank our panelists, I would like to note that the digital content from the entire colloquium will be available at FORA.org early next week. So with that, I want to thank all three of you and then turn it over to Michael.
Once again, we have lunch in the other room. After you get your lunch, everybody leaves and gets your lunch. When you return,